Welcome in to the DEVY Devotional Podcast, a show devoted to all things DEVY and C2C. Hosted by John Arrington and Aaron Wilcox. This dynamic duo brings you actionable strategies with player-driven analysis for your DEVY and C2C leagues. Let's dive in.
Let's dive in. Welcome into the DEVY Devotional, where we stay devoted to DEVY. I'm your host, Dynasty Coach A, joined as always by Aaron Wilcox at Aaron Wilcox86 on Twitter. And tonight we're going to dive into the 2026 class. Last week we dove into the sleepers, the 25 class, all that kind of good stuff. The players that we have to worry about next year. Now we're diving a little deeper. This is where it gets a little murky, a little more murky, a little crazier. But, we're going to have some fun talking about all these players. And I'll tell you what, there's a lot of players that we do need to discuss. It'll be a lot of fun. And Vince Mapstone is definitely devoted to this channel. We love it. And he wants to know what the good word is. Aaron, what's the good word?
Good word is that the 2026 class is exciting, though unproven. That's for sure, thus far.
That is absolutely for sure. In fact, I would say there's probably maybe 3 players that are that you could actually say you feel pretty good about, where they're going to end up and all that. The rest, it's almost all a projection. So it's difficult. This is I don't know. Aaron's been doing the DEVY game and the C2C game and all that kind of stuff longer than me. So, maybe he's felt this feeling before. I can say this is definitely the first time that I have sat here and gone, there's just no one that's proven, in this class. There are very few people that are proven in this class. I think it's a culmination of of COVID, the COVID year ending or coming to an end, as far as when they started school and all that kind of stuff, and staying in school longer, taking away from, some of these players' ability to get on the field, but then also, the transfer portal doing the exact same thing. It might not be a 5th-year player, but it might be a 3rd-year player that's transferring up from a small school program, and all of a sudden now they're jumping ahead of this freshman or whatever it may be. So there's just so many different ways that a guy can get buried, unfortunately, that it's really difficult right now. But like I said, I have not felt this way. I don't know about you.
Yeah. Well, I do think to a degree this goes on every year, right? I mean, the guys are much more unproven compared to where they end up after the year. But I mean, this is to a much larger degree, like you said, than maybe what we're used to. So, but that's what this is all about, this game of DEVY and C2C and just prospect evaluation in general. It's just all about making some of these bold predictions of guys who you have a really small sample size on. But, if you've been able to, let's say, scout them from high school, maybe you've seen just enough film on them, on field athleticism, following the camp buzz, all these other types of things that can make a difference when you don't have a lot of game tape and production to go on. If you can get all those other edges, you can certainly get some advantage on your league mates.
Yeah, now's the time to be doing all this research, or at the very least, listening to the DEVY Devotional, so you can hear all about it. And obviously, we know who's listening is Toronto Dave, always in the chat. We appreciate you, buddy, and we want to know how you're doing tonight, Dave. How are you doing? But like I said, we're going to be diving in essentially the same way that we did last week. We're going to go ahead and start with the QBs, get into the RBs, and then get into the wide receivers. For some reason, Aaron wrote down, he wrote TE. I'm not sure what that position is. It was below the wide receivers. I don't know what. I swear I've heard of it before, but I don't think we're going to be discussing anything about that. Was that some surprise thing that you were going to bring up later?
I know that's a bad word here. A couple letters or whatever you want to call it. Maybe if the listeners are really, really lucky and fortunate, we can cover some TEs.
We'll have to ask Brad if he wants to hear about some tight ends or not. How you doing, Brad? So why don't we go ahead and dive into the QBs? And we're back. So, like I said, we have a very exciting QB class, although an extremely unproven QB class, which makes it scary for Debbie, for C2C, for all of that, because you have to pay high prices, big, expensive prices for these QBs. You're not getting these players late, and yet we have no idea if any of them are going to hit, honestly. And should we go through the list, or should we go one by one?
Well, yeah, we can certainly rattle them off, but I mean, maybe if you have a clear first tier or anything like that, there's so many different ways we could break it down. That's for sure.
Yeah, I'm thinking. So the problem is my tier's a little different than how you listed it. So I don't know. I don't know if that'll work. But why don't we just go with? I say let's go with the top two, because I think that those are going to be like the most clear cut players that everyone's going to be in on, and everyone's going to be excited about. And that's Arch Manning out of Texas and Nico Iamaleava out of Tennessee. I almost got it. And so two players that people are extremely excited about. Arch has barely touched the field. I mean, if at all. And even like, but although he did have a great spring practice, so, I mean, that was exciting, or spring game, I should say. And so, he's been getting a lot of hype this year. Nico, on the other hand, was okay in the bowl game against a very difficult defense, but he also scored a lot of points on the ground. So, especially for C2C purposes, for scoring points, like, we're pretty excited about that. But, well, like I said, there's other players that are going to be in this mix, but I think that Arch and Nico are the two that everyone's in on. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, they get a lot of the hype, and I would also include Jackson Arnold, Oklahoma quarterback, in that conversation. But you're right; he doesn't necessarily have quite as much of that name value, though I think he should. Ultimately, there were five-star quarterbacks using the composite in this 2026 class coming out last year, and Jackson Arnold was one of those guys, and he actually, he also flashed like. Similar to Nico he didn't have necessarily the most amazing performances, but he also flashed his arm talent. He showed up consistently in the spring and in fall practices, for example, and now it's just been no doubt that's his job. So there's a lot of good things also going for Jackson Arnold, but you are completely right that Arch Manning, the name recognition is definitely there, and Nico is definitely getting some hype as well at Tennessee.
Yeah, you have to look at what they've done with that offense for a quarterback like Joe Milton, and think, what if Nico is that much better, which we are assuming and hoping that he is, then what can he do with that offense, with possibly even better players than what Joe Milton was dealing with? And so, it's something that we should be excited about. The numbers weren't amazing in that one game, but I want to give him the benefit of the doubt, because he was playing Iowa. He was playing one of the best, if not the best, defense in all of college, in all of the nation. And so I want to give him the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. I have him extremely high up in my ranks. I just, because of that one game, I have him a little lower than probably most people would have him. But I mean, he's still up there in the top. The top tier for me. Arch is obviously up there, and that's more of just a full projection from his recruit score and everything. Like, there's really not much. I think he attempted 5 passes, so there's not much to go on there. And even in those 5 passes, he didn't have a big time throw rate. His intended air yards was high, which I guess we like to see, but it's 5 passes, so it's just not too much to take away, unfortunately. He didn't complete too many of those, and so it's really difficult to take too much away from that. So we just have to hope that the spring practice or the spring game was something, or more of a sign of something that's coming in the future. And also all the reports out of practices saying how great he looks, he's taking that step that he needed to take, things like that. It's everything that we've wanted to hear or needed to hear about Arch. We basically heard, and to the point of some beat writers, some fans talking about Arch possibly taking over at some point in the season, which really, beyond me, there weren't too many people saying that was even a possibility last year.
Yeah, I mean, this upcoming season is definitely a different ball game now that Arch Manning has had that year under his belt. But I wanted to go back to Nico briefly, because I think we all recognize that Arch Manning, he has just that family lineage and that ability to process the game. He's mobile enough. He has all these traits that made him a very highly coveted 5-star type of guy, even against, questionable competition in high school. But going over to Nico, like you said, that Iowa game, he didn't light it up necessarily as a passer, but at the same time, 1 passing touchdown and 3 rushing touchdowns. This guy could break fantasy football at the college level. I mean, this guy could be absolutely electric in that system that has also put out a high-end producer, and like Hendon Hooker, for example, just skipping a couple of years ago. So certainly am excited for that Tennessee offense. Joe Milton's performance there this last year, I just, nobody really thinks that Joe Milton's actually a good quarterback. So it's just exciting, like you said, to see a guy coming in there who we expect to be much better.
Exactly. And Jackson Arnold had maybe a game's worth more of touches than Nico I, and he didn't do much better. I mean, that's the thing, is people seem to be really excited. And that's why I did not include Arnold, and maybe it's my own personal bias or whatever, but not that I actually have a bias against him, but I mean, my bias by looking at my own ranks, I just have him lower. And it's just because he did have a larger sample, albeit not a huge one. And he did some decent things. He actually hits the thresholds I look for big time throw rate and intended air yards, decent PPR points per touch, but he was very risky with the ball. 4.3% interception rate. Obviously, true freshman. I get that he can, bring that down and better that number, but 4.3% is not what we want to be dealing with for our starting quarterback. The yards per carry was okay. So he has a little bit of rushing game, but maybe more of like he can be mobile in the pocket more than like he's an actual rushing quarterback, like that kind of thing. And then the adjusted yards per attempt and everything were just lower. That's probably going with the interception rate, being so high. Obviously, if you're throwing picks, your adjusted yards are going to come down, all that. So it was not a bad showing by Jackson Arnold, but it was not a great showing by him either. Now they're going to the SEC. Things are only going to get more difficult for him. So I'm a little scared, man.
Yeah, and I get it with the competition level there. I will say that, going back to high school, and understand these are high school stats, so they're not the end all be all, but certainly very impressive rushing production. He did a little bit his first year in college on the ground, but definitely, I think it was 900 and some yards and 24 rushing touchdowns, I believe, for Jackson Arnold his senior season, and very good as a passer, 33 passing touchdowns to 3 interceptions. So when you're looking at a guy who can kind of put it all together, certainly a promising guy, but you're right, he has still a ways to go. But I like the things that Oklahoma's doing as far as building that wide receiver room up a little bit as well.
Yeah, they've definitely brought some guys in. Obviously, I've always been a big fan of Nick Anderson as well. So I mean, they have the pieces. I am a little worried about the schedule, about who they're having to go up against. But another quarterback that has very similar numbers. He's actually 1 spot ahead of Arnold, but he's actually transferring out and he's becoming a backup. Is Dante Moore going over to Oregon, and he had a lot more attempts. He actually had 214 attempts. So, much more proven profile, but very similar numbers to Jackson Arnold. So I don't know if that proven part of the profile is exactly what we want either. So I'm saying that I have a 1 spot ahead of Arnold. It's really just because he's thrown so many more pass attempts. So, it's just showing that like, he's not great. He's not bad. He's kind of in between. And I mean, honestly, I really do think that it's a good thing that he went from UCLA over to Oregon. He's going to sit a year behind Dylan Gabriel, learn another year, gain more, just gain more experience, gain more, whatever it is, whether it's working on your footwork, whatever it may be. Same thing that I was talking about with Arnold. He's hitting all the thresholds for big time throw rate, intended air yards. His PPR points per touch were a little low, but it is what it is. It's just that interception rate, 4.2% interception rate. I mean, this is not what we want, especially in the Pac-12, like of all places. Like if you have to have a 4.2, no, actually, I don't even want to finish that sentence. Don't ever have a 4.2% interception rate. Just don't do it. So His numbers are actually a little bit worse. It's just really that he's completed so many more passes, and so I have him one spot ahead. But honestly, I'm not feeling great about Moore or Arnold. And like you said, there was five-star QBs in that in the 2026 draft class, and yet I'm not very excited about a lot of them. Really, about 3 of them at the very least.
Yeah, well, I feel probably similar to how you feel with Dante Moore, but I actually don't have Jackson Arnold and Dante Moore all that close. I think that Arnold, to me, is just a much better player and much better opportunity ahead of him at this point. And as good of a recruit as Dante Moore was, he was another 5-star guy, right? I mentioned there was 5 dudes in that class that were 5-star players or 5 quarterbacks. Yeah, I just don't really see Dante Moore excelling. He might be kind of a flop. I'm not willing to completely give up on him. Like, I'm not saying anybody should just drop him off their rosters unless it's maybe the shallowest, 1 QB Devy league or something like that. Then, right, you don't need to be rostering Dante Moore.
I mean, you're waiting a long time. So, I mean, I
exactly.
get dropping him. I really don't hate it.
Yeah, right. I mean, in the right format, consider it. But I'm just saying that definitely a clear faller versus I don't view Jackson Arnold as one at all. He's just kind of more of a hold, right? Anticipating that next step up or that progression in his game versus, like you said, you unfortunately have to wait a while for Dante Moore. Who knows if he ever really gets that job there at Oregon? So certainly some doubt there. But I mean, ultimately, he is coming in. He was a clean quarterback prospect. He was accurate, and I just don't really know exactly what happened there at UCLA. I think misutilization of his talents to a degree, forcing him in too early, and that can kind of wreck a quarterback's confidence and flow, and just really their abilities when it's like they're a true freshman trying to process this college game, and there's not these great weapons at UCLA. I mean, who's going to bail Dante Moore out? He just does not have a lot of star power around him to help elevate that offense. So anyways, I am excited, I guess, to see if there is some promising times ahead there at Oregon. It's a fun team. We know that every year they should be putting out a pretty solid squad and a good offense. So maybe something will come about for Dante Moore in the next year or two.
Hopefully, but he's not going to get the option or the opportunity to throw too many passing attempts. And another player that did not attempt too many passes was Lenore Sellers out of South Carolina. He threw 4 passing attempts last year. However, in those 4 passing attempts, I believe he had 2 passing touchdowns. He may have even had a rushing touchdown in there. I don't really remember. I just know that people fell in love with Sellers. There was a few people from the C2C boys from campuscant.com that loved him to begin with. Like Felix Sharp was all over him from the beginning. I think there might have been a couple others. Aaron was as well. I'm sorry. I should give you your credit as well. I will admit that was last year. I dove into the recruits this year, so I didn't really know anything about them or cared about them or anything like that until this season. I will say he stands out because of those 4 passing attempts. Unfortunately, it's 4 passing attempts. So how much can we truly take away from it? It's very difficult. He clearly has a very big arm. He clearly has athleticism. These are things that we like for fantasy football purposes. So I get being excited about him. I also kind of want to put the, just pump the brakes a little bit on him because, man, I feel like he might be getting pushed up a little too much at the same time.
And yeah, I totally get that. I was definitely in on him as far as like just an incoming recruit very early in the process. So those early freshman drafts that were out there, like in February, I was getting him in like the 11th, 12th round or later. And then he started getting bumped up, like you said, a lot of guys in this industry, some of the guys at C2C, for example, like you mentioned, Felix being one of them, started to recognize the dual threat ability and just some of the things going for him. And that really skyrocketed his ADP past where I felt comfortable taking him. And I still feel that way where it's just a little bit elevated for my liking as far as how pricey he is in drafts. So if you're trying to acquire Lenore Sellers in startups, I mean, or if somehow he's out there like in a supplemental, I don't know. It's just not going to be easy to acquire him. It's not going to be cheap. And this time he's not that proven. Like there's a ton of upside, but I mean, if you like that Konami code type of guy, I mean, maybe you go with a Jalen Milroe. I don't know. We've talked about him in the show, on the show in the past, and I know folks are split on him as well, but you're kind of getting some similar things there with Lenora Sellers. But in a lot of ways, he really had a monster senior season in high school. First state title in high school history, I believe, what was the accomplishment that he brought about there. And he was just awesome. So I think there are some strong seasons to come from Lenora Sellers at South Carolina.
And to your point, who has a better shot of making it into the NFL as of right now? It has to be Jalen Milroe out of Bama than Lenora Sellers out of South Carolina, right? I mean, I get that we can be excited about Sellers and everything, and maybe we're like, hey, we're against Milroe here, but honestly, I feel like when it's all said and done, that Sellers is probably going to be pretty similar to Milroe. Maybe he'll be better. I mean, it's obviously possible. I'm not going to bank too much off of those 4 passing attempts. And, so I don't know, you can tell me, is there anyone to really throw to at South Carolina? I honestly cannot remember. I know they lost a couple players to the draft, to even the transfer portal. I'm trying to think. Why can't I think of his damn name? The 6-year guy that you were talking about.
Antoine Wells headed out.
Antoine Wells.
Yeah.
Antoine Wells left. Xavier Legette's gone. Like, who the hell is there to throw to that we're so excited about Lenora Sellers? So there's definitely question marks. You could probably make a pretty easy move to a Jalen Milroe or somebody around that area of rankings, draft, or whatever, and probably have much better odds of actually hitting with the player rather than hoping for Sellers. But Sellers is that mystery box, and you know how people feel about the mystery box.
People do love that. I guess I will give some shout out to Nicholas Harbor. He is just a absolute beast. But he's he's just raw at this point. We don't really know if he has any route running abilities. He's listed as a wide receiver, but I mean, Nick Harbor is also, he's huge. I mean, he's 6'5", he's 240 pounds, but he runs like a 10.2 or something like that in the 100. It's just ridiculous. The guy he's like DK Metcalf, honestly. So he doesn't have to be the most refined. He's not going to need to be a 3-cone specialist, if you will, as far as his testing, as his maybe route running abilities, but we just need to see a little bit more out of Nick Harbor this year. But yeah, they brought in some guys, some like G5 guys, Gage Larverdane, who had a good season last year, and I think is maybe one other guy.
Moving up, though, how moving up always scares me. Like that. I like Gage. I have nothing against him, but I think he was coming from Ohio, something like that.
Yeah, and there's like Amari Huggins, Bruce, who's coming from like Louisville, and those guys are just not game changers, right? They're maybe startable guys, but this is the SEC we're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. And Vince gets it. The box, you got to get that mystery box. The dynasty players, C2C, DEVY players, they all love the mystery box. And Jamie says, my new favorite DEVY guys. I was wondering if we were going to get Jamie in the chat because he was all over it last week, and there we go. And then Hollywood, Harbor, Olympic hopeful. I don't know. I mean, he could definitely. I think it was. I want to say it was Campus Life from the C2C podcast crew that were talking about it. It was one of those pods, and they were talking about how like 10-2, 10-1-8 is definitely qualifying time for the Olympics, but like he's just going to get blown away if he actually tries to go to the Olympics as fast as he is, as ridiculously fast as he is. But he's too big, too tall. Like it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, it would be amazing. I just saw that he declined the invitation to do so. So, like you said, he's maybe trying to save some face, and we'll accept that he is extremely fast, but maybe just not quite at that level of.
And if we don't want him to do it, like it would be bad for him to actually go out of his way to try to be an Olympic player, an Olympic sprinter. And it would just hurt him for football purposes. He'd probably have to lose weight, and that's definitely not what we want if he's a tight end. And even if we're calling him a wide receiver, he needs to focus on football for sure. Hollywood says he wants to run, but you're telling me he declined. So we'll have to wait and see what the official reports are. But I think I'm with you. I don't think he's actually going to run when it's all said and done. We have another. Actually, you know what? I was going to bring up a list here. but I think we should probably talk about one individual quarterback here, and that's Malachi Nelson. He was the last of the 5-star players from last season, the most hyped. I believe there was a time where he was considered the QB1, if not the player, the overall 101 in supplemental drafts and freshman drafts. And yet here we are. He's transferred out. He is no longer the starter or going to be the starter, presumed starter at USC. He's now at Boise State. Things aren't looking quite as good. And I'll tell you what, like his play wasn't all that great, albeit in a small sample either. He didn't look that great, but just the fact that Lincoln Riley's already giving up on him, kicking him out for not the greatest quarterback room. And it's just, I'm kind of all out. I know there's people that are like, oh, I think he can come back, and Boise State's one of the better in the American and this and that. I'm like, no, guys, like I'm just out. Especially if you can still have that one believer per per league or whatever, then just trade him. Just trade him to that one believer and just be done. Because even if you lose a round or two for what you originally spent, you have the ability to draft a quality player there. And I'm sorry, but I just don't think Malachi is going to be that.
Right. Yeah, you do have to get out of there for anything reasonable as far as a nice early supplemental pick, for example. At the end of the day, we always talk about it too. If you're paying up for quarterbacks in Devy, you better be pretty darn sure that they're actually good, or have a very good shot at being good. And at this point, well, didn't seem good enough to really start at USC, and we see that USC is kind of struggling to put out a really strong quarterback this year. And then, yeah, I just don't really know how Boise State's going to develop him. I'm sure he'll have a solid season, but is that solid going to be quite enough to actually be a prospect, or just, a college fantasy football guy? That is the issue.
Yeah, like I said, I'm out for C2C purposes. He can definitely score some points for us, and especially at Boise State, they're going to be a good offense. They're going to probably run all over their opponents, but yeah, I don't see it for Devy purposes. And when you're paying those kind of prices, I don't know where he's at right now. I haven't really been paying attention to his ADP or anything. I just know it's probably still too high because people hold on to hope with these 5-star QBs for so long. And it just seems like, we just talked about Dante Moore. He's still being drafted pretty highly, even though he's a backup quarterback and all that. But it's like, hey, he's a 5-star, 5-star QB and this and that. And it's like, yeah, well, at some point you have to actually make a decision and just, get out on these guys. And I tend to be at least one of the most aggressive when it comes to that kind of stuff. I'm like, let's just get out. And it doesn't always work out, but it doesn't mean that it didn't work out. I think a good example is AD Mitchell. I got out on AD Mitchell for a 2nd-round pick in this year's supplemental draft. You might look at it and say, hey, he was a 2nd-round NFL draft pick, blah, blah, blah. Like, you probably sold too low, and that's fine. But, I'm looking at it as I have extra ammo in this year's draft class, that I can go out and do more with the player that I was not a fan of with AD Mitchell. So like I have that extra, even if I don't ever make that pick, I can use it in a trade. I can use it to get future picks. I can use it to get other players, whatever it may be. And sometimes it's a lot easier to go, hey, let me give you an extra second and let's get this deal done, rather than, hey, let me give you AD Mitchell or whatever, like a specific player, and let's get this deal done. And so I think that, like I said, it doesn't always have to be like, oh, this guy won or this guy won. Sometimes it could just make a lot of sense for both sides. And speaking of which, Jamie was asking us, he traded his 311 and a late 25 third for Roman Wilson. So first of all, how do you feel about that? You're paying essentially 2 late thirds, almost 2/4, for Roman Wilson. How do you feel about that deal?
I'm fine with it. Just because in the late third, I'm starting to run out of guys that I really, really like. With Roman Wilson being a solid enough player and just having a great, opportunity to be one of the next Steeler wide receivers, just hoping that he can develop further, because he's still kind of raw. We know that he's not a complete player. We know that he's not a stud prospect or anything like that. He lands in the right spot to develop and the right opportunity there. It's a pretty low opportunity cost, or I should say, just a lower price tag to pay. So a couple of late thirds, I'm fine with it.
Yeah, I don't mind the price at all, and essentially you're getting very close to getting into fourth range, and that's where I'm like, make your deal, get your guy, like that kind of thing. It doesn't really truly matter. He said Javon Baker was taken at the 311, so now he wants to know if he made the right move. That's where it gets a little more difficult because I think we all kind of like Baker as a prospect, but now you're talking about landing spot, situation, opportunity, like that kind of thing. I would say that Wilson has just as good, if not a better opportunity than Baker. But when you're looking at the situation, I would say everyone would have to agree that Wilson's in a better situation. So now it's just really coming down to how you feel about them as players. So, but yeah, enough about that. We appreciate you sending that to us, but I think you made the right call. And, worst case scenario, usually those third round picks aren't going to kill you, even if it didn't work out. You'll be all right. So, let's get back to the QBs. All right. So this earlier I said that there was a QB that I disagreed with, at least how you ordered them. I didn't know if you did it in a particular order or if you just wrote them off the top of your head or whatever. But I am a lot higher on Aiden Childs out of Michigan State than at the very least, I feel like you are. I've heard some other people on other pods that are pretty high on him as well. But, in not a large sample, but also not the smallest of samples, he looked pretty damn electric and pretty damn good. And so I'm just kind of hoping for more of the same thing I was talking about earlier. He hit the thresholds for big time throw percentage. He hit the thresholds for intended air yards. He was one of like the craziest PPR points per touch, but only 35 passing attempts. So like maybe obviously I would assume that that's going to come down. A 4-star recruit, no interceptions, 6.3 yards per carry. So showing the athleticism, 11.1 adjusted yards per attempt. Like everything just stands out as quality play, just only 35 passing attempts. So, and we're not generally overly excited about the Michigan State quarterback. So, like those are like the two knocks on him. But man, I'll tell you what, I get him not being in the top tier or anything like that. I don't have him in my top tier either, but I don't have him that far behind.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't hate him. I just don't really have a strong take of me liking him either. But like you said, he has a lot of things going for him. That transfer out too, that's just another wild card of I get the move. Honestly, getting out of Oregon State, going to Michigan State, I actually like that. I just don't know how much I like that as far as elevating him. But his production, like you said, it was solid enough, but 35 passing attempts, and the majority of his production really came against UC Davis, and then in a blowout win to Stanford, a 62-17 blowout win to Stanford. So that was kind of the one drawback. So I'm hesitant to take too much from it, but the same could be said with Lenora Sellers, right? We already talked about that. So if anything else, or if nothing else, Aiden Childs has flashed a little bit more, but again, that's apples to oranges. I mean, this is for Oregon State, and that was the SEC. So at the end of the day, he has some upside. He has the tools. I think that's the fun thing that a lot of folks like with Childs is that he is athletic enough. He has enough arm talent. I thought he was really raw coming out of high school, but if he's been able to hone that in, then that's amazing. And we know that these guys can develop, especially when you just give them a year or two. So Childs is certainly a guy that we have to talk about, at least with this 2026 quarterback class.
Yeah, I think it should be in the mix. And maybe, people might have heard his name. They might say, oh, Michigan State, whatever. But I think if we're going to talk about that same athletic upside that with Lenora Sellers, we should have that same conversation about Aiden Childs. Maybe it's not quite the same, but it's probably not as far off as maybe people might think. And so I like having Childs up there. And I actually, I have him higher than some other guys, right or wrong. I have him higher than Jackson Arnold right now. I just that interception rate scares the crap out of me. It really does, man. I mean, if he can go out and obviously change that, and I've seen crazier things happen with QBs, especially freshman QBs. They just go out and completely tank as a freshman, and then they kind of get their head on straight. Jackson Dart is a pretty good example of that. We after year one, we're kind of all completely out on Jackson Dart, and then here we are. At least I'm one of his biggest fans at this point. So just because I'm saying I'm out on Arnold now, it's more of like an at cost thing. but we'll just see obviously what happens within like a month or two of the season starting. We should probably get on to the RBs. So why don't we just go through a couple names real quick, and then you can tell me if anyone truly stands out from this list. I have Fernando Mendoza out of Cal, Jalen Raynor out of Arkansas State, Hank Brown. Obviously, we have to talk about Hank Brown on every single pod. And then what was the last one? Anthony Calandria was my last one for. I'm trying to remember what the school was, Virginia. So anybody stand out there? Anybody that you think's worth talking about?
I think that those are watch list guys for sure. I mean, guys that you have to roster in C2C leagues, and Mendoza probably being the most under the radar one of the bunch. And I also have to add in Avery Johnson, Kansas State quarterback. I don't believe we touched on him, but certainly a guy who has a lot of upside on the ground. And then I think he's just going to take a big step up there this season. And then, I will throw out a couple of ideas of guys who could maybe stay from the 2025 class. I know this is a 26 pod, right? But if we're just strategically looking ahead and saying, well, do I want these picks? You have to understand that some of the guys who we want to come out maybe next year are not necessarily going to come out. And that could be like a Connor Wigman, who is a Texas A&M quarterback. And we know the guy, his talent level, I mean, he's a stud, but we just have not consistently seen it yet. I could see him sticking around another year. He needs basically a top and like a Heisman contending type of season to really make that jump, just because it'd be like basically 1 year of production to his name. So I think he needs a really strong season for Wigman to declare in the 25 class. So I think it could happen. He's talented enough to do that, but I could also see him just waiting out 1 more year. And then same with the Drew LR in some ways, where I think he might need another year to really solidify that draft stock. And I am not nearly as high on LR. And I know you aren't either, but at the end of the day, got a lot of tools. I think he can get there, but I think he needs more than just this year to eventually get there. But the guy's got some crazy tools, arm talent, size, all that kind of thing. So those are guys who could potentially be part of this 26 class if we're going to guess or maybe project out a little bit.
No, I definitely agree with that. I mean, I would not that either one of us think that he's good or going to even be like true NFL prospect, but Cade Klubnik will probably be sticking around as well. So, yeah.
Ooh, you had to go there, huh?
I did. There's no way in hell that he's going to be an NFL player.
On to the RBs, I think. That was good.
No, I think you're right. On to the RBs. Yeah, that was a good time to switch because it got ugly quick. But for the RBs, we'll try to go through a little quicker because we talked about a lot of running backs last week. It's such a strong RB class in the 25 draft class. The 26 has some strong, some strong players, but just not a lot of proven players, unfortunately. Justice Haynes, I believe, had like 21 rushing attempts or something like that. Caleb Jackson didn't have too many more. CJ Baxter was hurt all throughout the season. Roderick Robinson actually, produced pretty well in a small sample. Again, 24 rushing attempts, but now he's kind of buried with Travis Etienne and things like that. So those are kind of the 4 big names of the group. Other people might only have 3 names. I like including Roderick there. I like giving him his props, but how are you feeling about this crew here, this top 4? And would you have anyone in or out of that top 4?
Yeah, no, I do like that grouping for sure. And what I'll say too is this goes back to our question that was posed at the very beginning of this podcast. And it's like, how comfortable are you, or how excited truly are you when these guys are so unproven? And to me, I really, really like a lot of these players. I think they have huge upside. They've got great talent to pair with some opportunity ahead. And I'm not afraid whatsoever of projecting some great things, knowing that the running backs every year, I mean, it doesn't have to be the 26 class, they flop. we know that it's such a volatile position just because of the injuries, the physical nature of that job, and that they're kind of easily replaceable. And there's always these like off the field things that kind of throw players off, and they fall off for one reason or another. Like years ago, John Emery Jr. thought, he's a super talented 5-star guy. Trey Sanders, 5-star guy. I mean, you go down the list just every year. It's kind of like that. These guys just kind of fall off. Zach Evans, right? Zach Evans was up there with Bijan. Unfortunately, we just don't exactly know what was going on there still to this day, but we know that running back's volatile, but I'm not afraid to push these guys up because we know that's how you get the Bijans of the world. You have to be somewhat aggressive. And Haynes at Alabama just seems like he's a stud. CJ Baxter at Texas. I mean, we know what Texas is putting out there for running backs. He has the size. He has the 5-star pedigree. Caleb Jackson has the speed, size, flashes as a freshman, and Roderick Robinson, probably the lowest. I'm actually lower on him, I will say, than any of those first three guys that we mentioned. I don't think that Roderick Robinson right now is in that conversation, but he could very easily prove me wrong this season. He's just so big. He's like a different type of back at 240 pounds. That's for sure.
Yeah, I love the big boys, but honestly, I think he produced well enough to be considered in that top grouping. However, like you said, or like I said, he's kind of buried behind Trevor Etienne. So like that's not the greatest thing. And obviously there's other players that are going to be involved, other running backs that are going to be involved at Georgia. So it's not like it's just Trevor Etienne, because then I might say it could be a nice 1-2 punch. And honestly, I still think it's going to be a pretty nice 1-2 punch with those two. Unfortunately, there's going to be other players mixed in, and I feel like they might try to throw the ball a little bit more this year than they have in years past. They have a pretty solid wide receiver core, which we haven't always been able to say for these Georgia squads. So I like Roderick. I'm probably higher than most. I'm probably too high on him just because there's no way for me to like truly filter like, oh, this guy is buried behind this guy and so on and so forth in DEVY Beth at the very least. I do that in the NFL side. I probably should go ahead and take the time to do it on the college side as well, but that takes time, and I've been working on other stuff. So get off my back. No, I'm just kidding. Jamie was in the chat. He missed the first part of the pod, so we're going to catch him up real quick. He said, is Arch Manning expected to come out in 2026? What is his DEVY ranking? Just really quick, I'm going to say, I would say that, yes, we are assuming he will be coming out in 26. It would not be a huge shock if he did not, though. Like that wouldn't be that much of a shock, because obviously we're kind of assuming he's only going to have had 1 year of, in college at that point, and maybe he would try to get another year under his belt. Would not blow my mind, but he's a Manning. He already has that name cachet and everything. I feel like we are all expecting him to come out. And as far as the actual DEVY ranking, I mean, he's generally going, top 5 at the very least for DEVY QB rankings. So he's going very high. And so, it's a completely unproven player. And that's what we were talking about before, is you got to go ahead and pay that price without having ever seen anything from him. But back to the running backs, this is one of my favorite, what I kind of thought was a sleeper at some point, but now just I hear his name over and over and over. It's definitely no longer a sleeper, and it's Abu Sama III out of Iowa State. I swear, man, like a couple months ago, we were talking about him, like I said, like as a sleeper. Hey man, think about, don't forget about Abu Sama, and now it just seems like he's the hottest thing that we've ever seen, and kind of midway proven, 91 rushing attempts. So nothing crazy, but I tell you what, he looked pretty damn good on those 91 attempts. Another player that's just completely solid all the way through. 13% big time run rate, 1.2 PPR points per touch, 55 scrimmage yards per game. Decent size, good enough size, and maybe not the pedigree at Iowa State, but we're kind of liking Iowa State this year, so we're liking the running backs too.
Yeah, I mean, I really like Abu Sama as well. I think you summed it up well as far as the Iowa State connection there. I love that. I'm curious to see what he ultimately weighs in at, because right now at 5'11", 200, it's like, well, I mean, certainly that's enough size as a second-year player for him to be able to, A, put on more, and B, if not put on more, at least, be a functional NFL back at 200-ish pounds with that frame. But I think he'll bulk up further. And ultimately, I like his blend of athleticism. He runs tough, and he's going to build on that consistency. I have no doubt. So I'm really excited for what's ahead with Abu Sama. He's not necessarily a sleeper by any means anymore, like you said, but you can still acquire him. You don't have to pay a first round supplemental pick in most drafts. You can probably get him a little bit later than that if you're doing like a supplemental C2C or maybe Devy League draft. I mean, maybe the second, third, you have to start considering him, though. That's for sure. You're not going to get him past the third round in a supplemental. That's for sure.
I heard a supplemental draft today from, I want to say it was the, Defending the Natty pod, and they had Josh Chevalier and Eric Froton on. Jared Palmgren did, and I want to say that Abu Sama got drafted in the first round of their supplemental draft. It might have been the old pod, because I think they had like 2 pods come out, very similar timing and everything. But yeah, he went. No, this one was a C2C supplemental draft, I believe, and so yeah, he was drafted in the first. That's obviously they're going to lean more towards, CFF stuff, because that's what Palmgren does. But I think that, I think you're right. I think you really got to consider it in the second. And if you don't take him in the third, you're just not getting him. I would assume that is pretty fair. So, especially in my drafts, you're not getting him probably past the second in my drafts. And in that one, the supplemental that we have, I have the 4 first rounders in a row. Screw it. I might just take them in the first. Who knows?
That'd be a power move, but I don't hate it, because a lot of times the guys that, the freshman wide receiver, oh, this is a sexy name, ends up not nearly being as high of a probability bet compared to a running back who has already shown the flashes that Abu Sama has.
Exactly. And, he's not a perfect prospect. Like you said, you'd like to see where he's going to fall into the size gamut and everything, but he's not bad either. And then we have another player here, and I actually had him listed as a little smaller. You have him listed at 210. I had him listed at 198, and that's Darius Taylor out of Minnesota. Now, that's your that's your backyard. So I'm going to go ahead and go with your weight here. Maybe he bulked up a little bit without me realizing it, but I'll tell you what, Darius Taylor showed for the most part that he could handle a full workload last year until he got hurt. So we're kind of hoping that was more of a fluke and not just like him, the inability to do that workload. But yeah, like I said, I have him at 198, and you have him at 210. So we got to figure out if you're right or wrong.
Yeah, and I think all the sites will start coming around on that weight, just because it's the one that the team site had this offseason. So I think that's probably an updated one from the spring or summer, I'm assuming. But yeah, I think he's a very solid back. He's not necessarily the biggest home run hitting type of guy, so he's never going to be that elite back, in my opinion. I like Darius Taylor a lot. I'm a Minnesota guy, so I'm partial to that as well. And he's going to be an awesome producer for the next few years. But yeah, I don't necessarily think he's elite, but I think he's a versatile enough guy. He has enough. I'll say he's very agile, but not maybe the most bursty, not the best straight line sprinter out there. So I'll say that he's solidly in, maybe a couple tiers down from maybe the top guys in this class, but certainly a name that we need to recognize, because he's going to be a great producer and in a lot of conversations as a upper end back in this class.
Yeah, and everything that he did last year before he got hurt was pretty solid. Like you said, maybe not the best, maybe not the most electric, but just completely solid all around. Even showed receiving, part of the receiving game, showed a little bit of everything. And so it's just really difficult to hate on him at all as a prospect. But like you said, when it's all said and done, he'll probably be maybe a tier 2, tier 3 player. And so, we're not thinking tier 1 here. I don't think that upside is there. Where with a player, like, I don't even want to say that Abu Sama has the tier 1 upside. I'd probably say closer to tier 2 or something like that. I mean, he does have the upside, but he'd really have to put it all together and just really be that much better being at Iowa State and all that kind of stuff. So we'll have to see what all happens there. We know that Minnesota is going to run. We know that for a fact, and so hopefully Darius Taylor will get his. But then another player that did not run a lot last year, kind of like the top tier guys that we were talking about, was Quentin Joyner. And, we can make a lot of excuses, but, people want to say that Marshawn Lloyd didn't touch the ball enough when he was at USC, he didn't ever take over as a workhorse back, that kind of thing. And yet Quentin Joyner only touched the ball 19 times last year as a true freshman. And honestly, he didn't look amazing doing it. Only a 5.6% big time run rate, not really showing a lot of burst or anything in those 19 touches. Everything else looks okay. We know the receiving part isn't really going to happen. That didn't happen for Marshawn Lloyd. It definitely isn't going to happen for a true freshman. So I'm not hating on Quentin Joyner here, but I do have him a little bit lower just because I'm a little scared off by that burst, by that big time run rate.
Yeah, and I mean, he almost ran for 7 yards per carry, so that is something that I think, and I mean, that's one stat, right? Yards per carry doesn't say everything, but that's essentially the same as what Marshawn Lloyd did, but Lloyd just had it at a much higher volume. But you saw that Quinn Joyner clearly looked much more explosive than Austin Jones there, who received quite a few carries for USC, and he was a little bit lower down there in efficiency marks. So just Quentin Joyner is a guy that I'm kind of partial to. I wrote him up this year for the DEVY guide as well, and just really by watching him and kind of seeing how good of a player he was in high school, it's just easy to root for this kid and the opportunity that he has. Because look at, I mean, who's there after Marshawn Lloyd? Now that Marshawn Lloyd has moved on and proven that yes, he was clearly an NFL caliber back. So Quentin Joyner seems to be that next guy up. He was the guy USC had the most faith in, and it sounds like he's at least the 1A there this season. So I'm just really excited for what's ahead for Joyner. I think he's a stud, and I think that he could easily move up past like some of the guys that we've even talked about so far, like Darius Taylor, Roderick Robinson. I mean, I think that there's the potential there, but no, at this point, you can't rank him that highly ahead of those guys quite yet.
Yeah, I guess it all just depends on price because I've been hearing his name a lot more recently, and so I'm just a little scared that he might be getting a little too much hype. And and Mike wants to know where's the Weller. Unfortunately, I do not have any Weller tonight. I'm slacking, but I promise you there will be Weller on the next Devy devotional. I will make you that promise right now. I let you down. Speaking of letting you down, Ruben Owens out of Texas A&M let everyone down, especially Beth, because Beth seemed pretty high on him. Once I did my recruit rankings and everything, I went back and still looked at last year's class, and Ruben Owens was pretty damn high, and yet he did not do anything. Like, he did not look good. Yeah. How are you feeling about Owens? And are you just completely out, or do you still have a little bit of hope there?
Yeah, I had him after Baxter and Haynes in the class, coming out. So I was very high on Ruben Owens, and he looked like a different back for whatever reason. I don't know if it was because he put on 10 pounds, a quick 10, heading into college. I think that could have something to do with it. So I'll be really curious to see if now he's been able to get a bit more explosive at that same weight, or what's going to happen there. But yeah, he was a 5-star back. Ruben Owens going to Texas A&M. We expected big things, especially as he was a little bit of an older back for the class, because in high school he was a 10.6 guy. He hit 21.5 miles per hour. I mean, that's really fast, or at least that's really solid on the field. And yeah, I mean, I think that he can make a guy miss laterally. He can use that speed, or at least he was able to in high school. I just don't know what happened there. So when we don't see that materialize onto the college field, we have to get scared off a little bit. We have to become skeptical. But there wasn't necessarily something that's like he didn't tear his Achilles, he didn't tear his ACL. Like, we don't necessarily think that there's some sort of maybe long-lasting injury here. It's just a matter of, this guy was verified in different ways to be very athletic in high school. He didn't quite look there his freshman season. What is going on there? You don't really know. There's a little bit of uncertainty, and it makes you wary. But at the same time, that he possesses those abilities. So that kind of makes it exciting as a post-hype type of guy. So a post-hype breakout, we'll say, at A&M, but Yeah, I'm not necessarily drafting him early or anything. I do have him in a league, and I might consider shopping him this offseason. It's just his stock has fallen. So it's like, what, I don't know what I can get for him, but I guess you'll never know if you don't try.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm basically all out at this point, because he touched the ball 113 times. Like we can't say it's even truly a small sample. Zero point 0.7 PPR points per touch. I really look for 1 PPR points per touch or more. That like that kind of like that minimum threshold I'm looking for to say, like, do you have what it takes to be in the NFL, make it in the NFL, like that kind of thing. And yeah, he just did not prove it. And then a 4% big time run rate, which is just not going to cut it. And when you started talking about those speed numbers and everything, I was just like, what the hell? How did that happen? And then a 4% big time run rate. That just makes absolutely no sense. But as we do, we're rambling on. I think it's time to get over to the wide receivers so we don't have a 2-hour pod. Now, luckily for us, there's probably not as many wide receivers, although you do have a pretty substantial list of players that could stay from the 25 class. But I think that Zachariah Branch and Jonte Cook leading off here, we can actually include Carnell Tate as well. We're three really big names from last season. Zachariah Branch was going either, if not 101, within the top 5 of supplemental drafts, of every supplemental draft. Carnell Tate wasn't that far behind. Jonte Cook was definitely in the first round, sometimes, even earlier than, or like even closer to like mid first, that kind of thing. And yet they all kind of underperformed. We can give a little bit of, leeway to Carnell Tate being at Ohio State with the Emeka Egbuka, with Marvin Harrison Jr., with all these players. Zachariah Branch, you can kind of make the same arguments, but he was on the field a lot, and yet he didn't really produce that much. And he was there, he was playing in the games, but he honestly wasn't running that many routes. And we have to figure out, is it just because he was so raw? Is it just because USC doesn't know how to use wide receivers at Dorian Singer? Or, is it just that he's not as good as maybe we thought he was? And then Jonte Cook, kind of the same thing. He was just buried, with Xavier Worthy, AD Mitchell, JT Sanders. You're not going to get on the field and you're not going to produce well. But now Jonte is getting some pretty big spring hype, spring game hype, all that kind of stuff. Carnell Tate is maybe falling off. I'm seeing people kind of fall out of love with him as they fall more in love with Jeremiah Smith. I don't hear about Zachariah Branch nearly as much as I used to. And so I'm kind of, wondering these 3 players, and this is why I've always kind of warned against getting overly excited about these freshman, players, is 3 players that you spent a hell of a lot of capital on last year. You're kind of scared about now, and you're sitting there going, what the hell do I have now?
Yeah, that's definitely fair. And I guess we were sitting there maybe saying the same thing about some of the guys last year, like the Luther Burdens, and you go down the list and say, well, they didn't really do much as freshmen, but then they take that next step and kind of remind you that they were these high-end talents. But there's also plenty of guys who are highly ranked wide receiver recruits who bust as well, and they never make it. They never take a step up in their game and their play. So I think at the end of the day, we have to be patient. It's so easy to say, I'm out on a guy. He just didn't look good as a freshman. And then he just comes back and completely something clicks with him. Maybe it just took a year to get acclimated body wise or game film wise, or whatever the case is, to the college game. But we certainly can still have concerns. That doesn't mean that you should just blindly pay up for these guys because they were once 5 stars and they're still high in DEVY ranks. So I'll say that Zachariah Branch, he has a very, very difficult task ahead of him, because basically if he does not develop that downfield game and he does not prove that he's like a Tyreek Hill type of player at that size, he's going to be much more of a Rondale Moore. Now, I hate to drop him in like 2 buckets and like those are his only options, but really for practical purposes, it's like, well, either he's going to be a well-rounded wide receiver who has enough juice to win downfield, or he's not. I mean, I think that that's a huge deciding factor for his ultimate value if he's going to be a little bit more of a gadgety type of guy. I think he has the talent to do it. I honestly do. I think Zachariah Branch will get there, but and not saying that he has to reach Tyreek Hill type of levels, but like as a higher end guy, even for that small stature. And then Carnell Tate, a guy who, he did some good things, absolutely. But we are seeing Mekik Buka, Zachariah Smith. You go down the list. Brandon Innes is coming back, and there's just a lot of mouths to feed, I guess we'll say, in that wide receiver core. And I think Carnell Tate can still maintain a starting job over an Innes, over some of those other guys. But Mylan Graham, who's coming in as a true freshman. But it's just going to be hard for Tate to truly stick out from like an offensive share type of standpoint. I think he's a good, but maybe not great type of wide receiver. But at the end of the day, probably day two, in his future for draft capital, I could see him still being a notable wide receiver for your Devy and then eventually your NFL squads. And then Jonte Cook is just kind of that, I'm not even going to call him mystery box because we know there's a lot of indicators that he is good. It's just that we haven't truly seen much yet from that sample. So a guy I'm not panicking on at all for Texas because it seems like he's going to be locked into a starting role, and that's going to be an explosive offense regardless of who the quarterback shapes up to be throughout the season. We know it's going to be a contending team, and I have no doubts that Jonte Cook will play a role. It's just, is he the clear alpha, or does he kind of slot in as maybe like a complimentary number two? But I still think he's going to be a large piece of that puzzle there at Texas.
Yeah, I agree. And you were saying how, you don't, you kind of have to invest in these top guys, but at the same time, you don't want to invest too highly and all that kind of stuff. Vince is asking, in terms of Devy, off the top of your heads, do you know the percentage of 5-star recruits that actually hit? Now, I've done a lot of research on this, and so I can tell you that it's right between 15 and 20%. So it's not high. You're talking about in your first round of Devy and supplemental drafts, you're looking about 2 players that are going to hit, something right around there. And that is not great odds. I can promise you that much. So I think that, that's why I've been kind of leaning towards, going with some of these players that have, actually hit, so especially leaning towards the 2025 class, leaning towards an Abu Sama, even like I was joking earlier about possibly taking him in the first. It might not be that big of a joke, when it's all said and done and I start looking at this stuff, I might just go ahead and take an Abusama because sure, I might not have the upside of a Jonte Cook or something like that, but I definitely have much better odds of him actually succeeding and or making it to the NFL. But I think I've heard some concerns about Carnell Tate's athleticism a little bit recently. I don't know if you have anything, if you agree with that or not. As a film grinder, I kind of see it in the numbers, but I mean, I don't mind Tate. Like I really don't mind him at all. Like his numbers were fairly good, nothing amazing, but kind of what I would expect out of a Ohio State wide receiver. So I can't really say too much to his actual athleticism, but I've heard that people are a little concerned that when it's all said and done, he might not have that actual NFL upside that we're looking for.
Right. And that's where I was kind of saying earlier, I'm not sure of his ultimate upside, but I think he can still be a solid player. Like I think coming into college, I was saying like a Chris Godwin type of guy. And then now like Michael Pittman, I think I've either seen that thrown out there or that was, something I kind of think of Carnell Tate being. So maybe not a guy who wins consistently down the field with a lot of speed, but he does have some technical components like that route running, that savviness with his movement abilities to win. And I think that's ultimately going to be a great skill for him to translate to the next level with. So, I don't doubt that he's an NFL type of talent. It's just how dynamic, how large is that ceiling?
Yeah, I agree with that. Moving on to the next tier, we have Eric Singleton Jr. out of Georgia Tech, Kevin Concepcion out of NC State, Eugene or Trey Wilson out of Florida. And then I guess we'll go ahead and include Brandon Ennis here, although like he was a much higher recruit, much more coveted recruit. And yet I think we kind of have to have him down here. He barely touched the field. He was a year 1-0. We're hoping he's going to get on the field this year, but I guess there's still concerns about, who's going to man the slot. Obviously we're expecting Igbokwe to play there somewhat, but I guess we're hoping that Igbokwe can go more to the outside a little bit as well. Maybe like move everyone around, and Innis can actually get on the field and do more this year. So those 4 players, how are you feeling about the 4? Is there anyone that you would kick out of that grouping, or do you feel the same way basically about all of them?
Yeah. No, I mean, I like those guys fine. I don't really love Brandon Innes at this point, and I know you don't either. It's just, where do you draw the line here with who you group together? I do think that Singleton Jr., Kevin Concepcion, and Trey Eugene Wilson, those guys would be going in somewhat of a similar range in drafts. So I think it's fair to compare those guys in some ways, or try to rank them somewhat in the same tier. I know that Eugene Wilson, Trey Wilson, whatever you want to call him, probably the most valuable of the bunch, but maybe Casey Concepcion would be as well, of folks really holding on to what Concepcion did as a true freshman. But you and I think we both really value what Eric Singleton Jr. did at Georgia Tech, just flying under the radar. It's insane. At a high level of competition, he just killed it all over the field. He shows great speed, great route running abilities. His hands are really solid. He has the opportunity to be an alpha for years to come. I'm loving what Eric Singleton Jr. is bringing to the table, and I like him more than Casey Concepcion, Trey Wilson, or Brandon Innes. And at this point, Brandon Innes is probably that 3rd receiver at best at Ohio State. And I say that at best very generously. So I don't know that he necessarily has a consistent role in that offense versus Eric Singleton Jr. I mean, the offense is flowing through him. He's already proven, like, he already had a breakout. And Casey Concepcion and Trey Wilson, they're fun players, but they're a little bit more of these underneath type of guys. So I know we talked about some of that concern for Zachariah Branch. I think some similar concerns have to be present there for Casey Concepcion and Wilson, as are they going to be true, well-rounded wide receivers that can win all over the field? They have not proven that so far, but going back to maybe high school film can tell you some of their abilities. But none of those guys, Casey Concepcion, Eugene Wilson, or Brandon Innes, am I paying up their current prices to draft on my teams right now?
Yeah, I'm lower on all of them. Well, except for Singleton. Like, I love Singleton, but of the names, the Concepcion, Zachariah Branch, and Trey Wilson, they're just. I'm okay with, you can be a lower A-dot player and everything. I can get it. We moved you into the slot. We're doing all that. I'm fine with it. When you get to the extremes that these guys are at, I'm like, Trey Wilson has a, let's see, where are you? I lost you for a second. Trey Wilson has a 2.8 intended air yards, or A-dot, 2.8 A-dot. Like, that's insane. Yes, he's athletic. Yes, he's exciting. Zachariah Branch is not that far off from that, 6.3 for him. And then Kevin Concepcion's at 8.5. So that's getting a little closer to where I'm like, I actually feel okay with what you did and everything, but it still kind of just shows, it's not that like overly exciting, go win the route, go win the game, go get me 5 points on, one catch. Like, it's not that kind of thing. And so that's why I'm not nearly as excited about those players. But one other player that I'm excited that I would put, and I know this is extreme, I get it. I'm saying this ahead of time. I'm going ahead and I'm putting my stamp on London Humphreys, and I'm throwing him into the same mix as those guys, because now he's at a high quality program in Georgia. Yes, he might be a little buried. Like I said, this is probably one of the better wide receiver cores that they've had in a very long time, at least overall. Obviously, you can make arguments for like one particular player being the most talented or whatever, but like there's some pretty good players. Dominic Lovett, obviously, London Humphreys, and some others as well. But I'll tell you what, London Humphreys is an exciting player. He showed athleticism, he showed talent in the SEC already, albeit the worst team in the SEC, but they have to play other SEC teams. So like he was still doing it against other SEC defenses, if I could speak. And yet, 16.8 A-dot, 20.8 yards per reception. He put up 450 yards, over 4 PPR points per touch. just like a 16% market share as a true freshman. All these, and it wasn't like they didn't have anyone at that squad. I mean, there was two other quality wide receivers that we actually like. So it's not, oh, he was just a decent player on like the worst possible team. No, like there was other quality wide receivers on the squad, and yet he made his mark as a true freshman. Maybe it's not week 1, maybe it's not week 2, whatever this season. At some point, London Humphreys is going to make his mark, and I'm putting my stamp on him now. I want to make sure everyone in the DEVY realm knows London Humphreys is Dynasty Coach A's boy.
Heard, man. I hear you loud and clear. And I'm not like a hater by any means. I know that you are the London Humphreys guy, so I don't think I need to speak any further other than, there is a lot of competition there. So for him to really stand out, to be the potential 1A, 1B type of guy there, will take a lot. I will say that for sure. But he, like you said, he's done promising things where you have some hope that he can make that next step. Absolutely. And as far as some other guys to mention, just we should probably put some respect on like a Jalen Hale, Alabama wide receiver. It's just the injury thing, right? That's
we would have already talked
factor
about him if it wasn't for the injury. We would have already talked about him.
Yeah, right. And no to answer in the chat. London Humphreys, I don't think he is related to little Jordan Humphrey. But
that's a good question. I didn't even think about that.
But I guess I can't say for sure. No. But as far as some other guys, Deuce Robinson, if you want to consider him a wide receiver, it's so hard to tell at this rate. I will actually say that Deuce Robinson might not even be the best, like big bodied wide receiver at USC. I mean, there's some talent there, and I like Deuce. I really do like him. But I think that there's other talent there. They got Nick Harbor. We already talked about him at South Carolina. Jaden Greathouse, Notre Dame wide receiver. Again, he is a guy who just underwhelmed, and to me doesn't quite have the juice to make it work. So I need to mention them, but they're not necessarily guys I'm endorsing with enthusiasm by any means yet at this point.
Yeah, I'm completely out on Greathouse, but Hollywood just gave us do we need to change the name of our show? I mean, I love Devy Devotional, but do we need to be the Jaws show? The John Arrington, Aaron Wilcox show? I mean, we could make a lot of things happen with Jaws here. I like it. We'll have to wait and see, but yeah, I don't know. I love Devy Devotional, but I could get behind some Jaws. But yeah, Greathouse, yeah, he can get eaten by a shark. Actually, that was kind of mean, but he's not very good. And Nicholas Harbor, we talked about him before. He's so raw. He's so fast, but he's so raw. I really need to see him take a step forward. And I guess he broke the year 1-0 thresholds and everything. So there's still reason to be, to be excited about it. But I don't know. I feel like there can only be so many DK Metcalfs in the world. I just I want to believe, but I don't know if I actually do believe. I'm actually pretty high on Deuce Robinson, and in fact, and we can even talk about Jacoby Lane as well. I'm pretty high on both of them. I guess with Robinson, it's really just going to be what does he end up being. I think from the start, USC's kind of made it clear that they wanted him to be a wide receiver, but yet he was always kind of listed as a tight end. And I still don't know if he's playing tight end, playing wide receiver, or whatever. But the team has been pretty honest about it. But we talked about Zachariah Branch, getting on the field but not doing too much. Deuce Robinson outproduced him, and he saw the field more. Like he actually had a solid true freshman season. We just have to see what he does moving forward. And I guess from what I've heard from the C2C boys, he's not a very good baseball player, so we don't really have to worry about him like possibly being drafted or anything like that anymore. So I'm more willing to be excited about Deuce Robinson this year than I was last year, and yet it seems like a lot of people have fallen out of love with him, whereas they were pretty excited about him last year when he was this 5-star tight end recruit and this and that and everything. It's just like I don't know. I'm in, especially at cost.
Yeah, and Deuce Robinson is a guy that I still like. It's just a matter of his route running is not really there at this point. Like I just don't like that aspect of his game. And for a big guy at 6'6", 215, like it seems as though he's destined to be a wide receiver, not a tight end at 215. I do think that based on the things I'm hearing, like Jacoby Lane might be outplaying him. And I think that's the big, I guess, concern this offseason is that Jacoby Lane at 6'4", 195 pounds might actually be taking that job as an outside guy. And maybe both of them can earn that, but we've already talked about Zachariah Branch having a prominent role, being a starter there. I don't know if Micaiah Lemon will end up seizing a role there, based on him playing some defensive back as well. That really impacted what he was able to do as a freshman wide receiver, but he was still good enough to at least get some playing time. So I'm really curious to see how that wide receiver room stacks up there at USC. I mean, imagine Zachariah Branch in the slot, and then the outside they got Deuce Robinson and they got Jacoby Lane. I mean, good luck covering that. That's a fun lineup, having to worry about those big outside guys and then somebody across the middle of the field that can just slice and dice you and take it to the house.
And then Miller Moss misses them by 10 yards.
That will be very sad.
It'll probably be very realistic as well. But I think you had a pretty large list of players, like I said, from the 2025 class that might stay. I feel like we've already touched on all these players, so I don't know if we actually truly have to go over them, but there's just quite a few players that haven't quite done enough in their college careers to where we can say, hey, you're definitely coming out this year. And so, a guy like Isaiah Bond, Varian Brown, Dane Key, Alec Amanor, Squirrel White, Antonio Williams, Matthew Golden, Jeremy Bernard, Deion Burks, Nick Anderson, any of those guys can and possibly will come back for another year and be in the 2026 class, which would make the 2026 class unbelievable if any of that happened, especially if quite a few of them happen. We're already pretty excited about some of these players, but you start throwing in Aomanor or an Isaiah Bond into the class, and all of a sudden you're feeling pretty damn excited.
Absolutely. And then you get some of the guys who kind of face planted or just didn't really do a whole lot as freshmen. And I'm just going to recap a couple of the top guys recruit wise from this class who just didn't do anything and we haven't mentioned yet. There's always a chance that these guys can break out for one reason or another. I'm not necessarily betting on it at this point, but you get the jury on Dickey, who was a 5-star guy in this class at Oregon, and some injury concerns coming into his freshman season, hence why he probably didn't play. So maybe there is a route there, but we know Oregon's really crowded right now with Evan Stewart, with Tez Johnson, Hakeem Williams. I'm not a Hakeem guy, but former 5-star guy at FSU with a pretty wide open depth chart there, considering that Keon Coleman has now departed and Johnny Wilson has also departed, but to the NFL. And then you get like the Noah Rogers of the world, a high-end guy at Ohio State, not really doing anything, not getting playing time despite promising flashes in the spring, now going and getting a ton of hype at NC State, which is an emerging offense. I like that. But at the end of the day, I think I think that those guys are much more of long shots at this point, of course, right? You go down the list and Malachi Coleman at Nebraska, he gets some hype out there. I get it. I don't know if he'll fully put it together or be a stud, but somebody we got to keep tabs on. But you go down that list and you realize there's a lot of guys who bust, who just don't do anything as true freshmen. So further solidifies the idea of just be careful how many slots you're I guess, dedicating towards freshmen. I don't have a strict number for supplemental drafts, but I know that I am much more likely just to pass on freshmen as the draft goes on, because I don't want to roster, half my team should not be incoming freshmen. That just is a recipe to have just a ton of turnover. You might hit on some, but you're going to miss on a lot more. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think that is a great stopping point for that. Although, actually, no, that's not true. There's 2 more players that I want to talk about, and then we'll go ahead and get out of here. We've already done hour 20. Well, yeah, that's pretty normal for us. So, but I want to bring up Jordan Faison and Jace Brown, 2 players that we've talked about recently, but in this 2026 class that I feel like should at least be mentioned around this range, around your Jacoby Lane, Brandon Ennis, like at least around that area of players, although you probably have a couple different tiers here, but just high PPR points per touch, have done pretty well as true freshmen. Going in, we're kind of excited about what's happening at Notre Dame. They just brought in actually a pretty solid QB prospect or QB recruit. So maybe not necessarily this year, but maybe next year, things are going to be even better for Notre Dame. And then he could, Jordan Faison could put together a really solid junior season. All of a sudden he's in the 2026 mix. And then, we've talked about Jace Brown. I feel like 3 pods in a row or something like that. And, it's just, he's just in Kansas State, just a, really exciting player. And I think that, he's a little more proven with, running 184 routes last year compared to Faison only ran 87. But Faison just put up those really solid, like really high efficiency numbers in the few routes that he did, your yards per route run and all that kind of stuff. Jace Brown's a little more proven, but, maybe not as exciting as, maybe, that not as much of like a prolific player or anything like that. But all in all, I just think those 2 players need to be mentioned, because like I said, there's not that many players that are actually standing out in the 2026 class, and they definitely have.
Yeah, no, I like it as well, and I believe I've drafted both of those guys in a recent supplemental, so I definitely am on board. And Faison was, you wonder a bit, was it just he was one of the few healthy guys and effective guys at that point, and they're bringing in some guys, how are things going to ultimately shake up with him also being a very good lacrosse player? But at the end of the day, NFL is king. NFL should be, I guess, probably the priority for him if he thinks he has a shot to go pro. So Faison, definitely a very fun playmaker there. I mean, he's just fun to watch with the ball in his hands. He's quite elusive. And then, like you said, Jace Brown is intriguing. And I appreciate you also bringing up some of the guys from the 2025 class who could stay at the wide receiver position. And we should also mention, just at the running back position, I was already talking about how I love like Justice Haynes and CJ Baxter and Caleb Jackson. You go down the list. We talked about Abu Sama. And that's not even considering that some studs from the 2025 class might remain and might stay in college. So we're talking about like Amarian Hampton, Ollie Gordon, Damian Martinez, Jordan James, one of Katron Allen or Nick Singleton maybe might stay. Jam Miller at Alabama. You could go down the list, and there are plenty of guys. Not all of them will declare for the NFL draft. We would think the top guys like the Travion Hendersons of the world, Quinshon Judkins would likely, but even one of those guys could remain. I'm not saying I'm predicting it as the ideal or the high probability outcome, but we just know that sometimes these running backs stay an extra year, like a Devin Neal did this year, and that could further load up this 2026 running back class.
Yeah, as unexcited as I have been about the 2025 class, I'm getting pretty damn hyped about the 26 class, and it might be stupid because they're not proven at all. But there's just so many big name players that could hit that I feel like some of them have to. Even if we just stick to the 1 and 5, the 20% rule or whatever, we're still gonna have some big name players. I really do like Jonte Cook. I feel like he's going to break out this year. And so, if we get a couple of those high-end guys, maybe not to the MHJ Malik Neighbors level, but maybe like that tier below, if you can get like a couple of Roma Dunze level players or something like that into the class, and then with all the running backs and everything, I think it can be a pretty exciting class. So, I kind of jokingly named this pod don't sell your or like hold on to your 26 first or whatever, but I mean honestly it's probably pretty good advice.
Absolutely. And the quarterback and running back position, especially for me, I'm really intrigued by with this 26 class. And the wide receivers, like you said, there's the Jonte Cooks and a few other guys who are certainly worth our while.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully you guys enjoyed the 2026 deep dive. Jamie was asking where he can find DEVY leagues, how to get into them, and all that. There's obviously a lot of information. You can go to campus2canton.com. They have some resources there. Aaron, writes for them, so he can obviously hook you up with it. I think the easiest thing is just to always be on the lookout. Like I just did a C2C startup that we're actually, we're actually working on as we speak. But it filled up pretty quickly. So unfortunately, you just have to kind of keep your ear to the ground and keep an eye out for what is actually happening. But there's definitely some different sites and different groups that we can get you into that will help you find the right people. I think the easiest thing is just slide into one of our DMs, Aaron or myself, and we can try to get you hooked up with the right people to get into DEVY. If you've never been able to do it or want to get into more, once you get into one, you start getting hooked. Next thing you know, you're in C2C leagues, and then next thing you know, you're like Aaron doing C2C startups with the NFL and campus sides combined, and it's a 75 player auction. That's when you're a true degenerate. We really do appreciate you guys checking us out. Obviously, second podcast on the Optimus feed. We appreciate Nate and the whole Optimus crew, and make sure you're checking out all of these all these pods. We're basically putting out a pod like every other day, just about. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube, because for a brand new company, it's so important. I don't normally like to beg, but at the beginning of this company, the beginning of these shows, I'm going to beg you guys, go ahead, make sure you're subscribed, make sure you're liking, commenting on the videos, doing all that, because it's so huge for a brand new company. So once again, we appreciate you guys listening. We will be back in your ears in 2 weeks. Are we going to talk about the 2027 class, or are we going to go ahead and transition to something else? And I just realized that I'm sitting here thinking I was doing so well with hitting my transition videos and everything. I never changed the overlay this entire time. So there we go. Thanks for watching. Coming up next time, what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about the 2027 class, or what?
Yeah, I mean, that's our trajectory right now. So we'll let you know if that changes. I guess stay tuned to see what we come up with for next time.
Absolutely. And we're still getting comments. Hollywood, Jamie, Vince. Yeah, we really do appreciate you guys and all of your comments. It's really cool having all the comments in there, meeting new people, doing all that. That's the great part about coming over to Optimus. You bring on some new fans, bring on some new comments and all that. But we will see you guys next time. But for now, we are going to go ahead and cash out. See ya.